For me tonight, it's really a unique honor and a privilege for me to be invited this evening, and particularly in this room. And this room has a lot of memories for me because this is in this room about 13 or 14 years ago. This is where I sat for CFA level 1. And I remember I sat somewhere on where that table. And that's where I sat my exam. And it was particularly difficult and interesting at that time because there were very few CFA students and even fewer CFA charter holders. I think at the time there were less than 9 or 7. It was somewhere around that number. And so finding material or even finding guidance was fairly, very, very difficult. I remember when I started off, I had one book. That is that investment analysis, Riley and Brown, and that's the only book I had. And I was misguided to thinking that that's the only book I needed. So every morning I would wake up at 5 to read this one book. And I was using my Casio calculator because I couldn't find a calculator. And I remember sending Jim McPhee to try and get me a calculator. And he came 2 weeks to exams and said, "Sorry, James, I couldn't find you a calculator." And I was naive to think I could do the exam without one. Fortunately, a week to the exam, a friend of mine decided not to sit the exam, and he gave me his calculator. And I remember spending a whole Sunday studying the manual so that I could be ready for the exam. I think fortunately it was not as competitive then as it is today. So we passed and proceeded to level 2, which was the next room. And level 2, I think when we began, we were about 60 of us. Level 2, there were around 20 of us. At the time, I understand now that the material is now in packs and in volumes. Those days, you had to buy almost 20, 30 books. And so, having gone through my experience in level 1, I decided to buy all the books that were required. At the time, I was a humble accountant at Centum, then ICDCI, and I had to take a SACCO loan, to buy all these books because, there are very, very many books. Well, once again, I think the world has really transformed, and I'm happy I'm not doing exams now. We proceeded to level 3, and in level 3 we had, I think there were 4 of us who were doing the examination, and it was always interesting because there was really nobody to consult. So today it's a great day, when you have 13 CFA charter holders, individuals, Kenyans, and receiving their charter on this occasion. It really shows how far we've come as a profession and as a country over the last 12 years, actually over the last 1 decade. So I'd like to begin by congratulating all those who've earned the CFA Charter. And the process leading to the award of the CFA Charter is, as many of you know, a very painstaking one. And it's a journey that many start, but very few complete. And the difficulty of this endeavor is probably best illustrated by an ad that ran in the Financial Times about 4 or 5 years ago. And what the CFA Institute did is that they listed all the names of all the CFA charter holders, individuals who had passed the CFA exam that year. They put them in one page in the FT, and there were words on that page. The only thing more difficult than reading all these names is getting on this page. And I think that exemplifies the really challenge of passing these exams. And today, this is the highest number of individuals to have earned the CFA Charter in any 1 year. And for me, it's a very, very pleasant day. I recall when we introduced the CFA program at Strathmore University, we began working on it in 2002. And the inaugural class of 2003, some of the members are here today. I've seen Fahima. She was in that class, CFA Level 1 class. She came in very enthusiastically, and I could see her enthusiasm. Was it increasing by the day? There was Eleanor. There's Steve Amadai of Genesis was in that, is in Kampala. And these are individuals who've gone ahead to finish the program and really to play a big role in promoting this program. Fahima today is a vice chair of the East African Society of Investment Professionals, and they've really contributed and given back to the profession. And I would like us to please acknowledge their effort. Let's give them a round of applause. And I think the other lesson for me, if you wish to succeed in any endeavor, such as growing the CFA program, you need to get ladies on your team. I think in some of the other societies that I'm involved in, I've now realized that the challenge we face is that there are not enough ladies. And I'm also happy today that some of the recipients of this award are actually ladies, because I think that's really, they are very useful in terms of the program. I would also like us to appreciate those who will be receiving their CFA charters this evening. All 13 of them. It's not easy. They have made us proud. Because of them, I think we now have enough members to form a society. And out of the 13, 2 are my colleagues, so I'm particularly very proud of that as well. So I think it's only fitting, because we are here for them. Today is their night, that we recognize them, and please give them a round of applause. So, candidates and members, as I was thinking about this evening, a couple of questions went through my mind. And I want to pose those questions, and we can consider them this evening. What does it mean to be a CFA charter holder? What are our obligations as CFA charter holders? And what is expected of us as charter holders and candidates? In my view, the recently approved mission statement for the CFA Institute very eloquently addresses these pertinent questions. And the mission statement of the Institute is to lead the investment profession globally by promoting the highest standards of ethics, education, and professional excellence for the ultimate benefit of society. Attaining the CFA Charter is not just about career progression. It is not just about a higher salary. In fact, on my table, somebody hinted that they would like a higher salary. It cannot just be about a bigger bonus. It cannot be about a better job. There's something bigger. And there's an expectation that as charter holders, we shall provide leadership, firstly, by promoting the highest standards of ethics, secondly, educating our society, and thirdly, professional excellence. And I would like to zero in on those words, the ultimate benefit of society. You know, societies differ. The American society differs significantly from the needs of the Indian society, or the Chinese society, or the European society. Societies are local. And as a CFA charter holder in Africa, you are challenged to employ your skills for the ultimate benefit of the society that you are a part of. And it's important that we try and understand the needs of the society that we are a part of. So what are the issues facing our African society today? I have read, and I'm sure you have read, many research papers, research reports. You've seen these stories in The Economist, you've seen them in the Financial Times, you've seen them in McKinsey, and they say many things. They say Africa is the last frontier, and that is true. They say that Africa is the only continent with significant potential for outsized returns over the long term, and that too is true. They say that the democratic gains made in our continent have prepared this continent for takeoff. That too is true. The IMF has recently projected that during the next 5 years, 10 of the 20 fastest growing economies will be in sub-Saharan Africa, and 2 will be in North Africa, and none will be in the developed West. And that too is true. McKinsey, in their report, Lions on the Move, indicated that Africa has 10% of the world's oil reserves, 40% of its gold, 80 to 90% of its platinum, 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land, and a 500 million strong workforce. Only China and India have larger workforces. That too, ladies and gentlemen, is an undeniable fact. Many good and great things have been said about Africa and Africa's potential, all of which are true. But ladies and gentlemen, it is also true that between 1990 and 2008, Africa made the least progress in reducing poverty. The proportion of people living on less than $1 a day declined by only 20% in our continent, compared to 40% in Asia and East Asia. You will also recall, I think it was on Monday, in the recent presidential debate, much of the time was spent discussing land. I think, did you notice that? This emotive issue called land. But if economic performance and standard of life correlated to the size of land holdings, then Kenya would have a GDP far larger than Korea. Instead, Korea's GDP is larger than that of the entire sub-Saharan Africa, in spite of the fact that only 30% of its landmass is arable, and it has only about 20% of the landmass that Kenya has. You've all seen reports that speak of Africa's young population and high fertility rates as a driver of growth. Again, if economic performance and standard of life was a function of population, then Kenya would have a GDP 9 times larger than Singapore. The reality is that Singapore, with a population of just 5 million, has a GDP 7 times larger than Kenya. You've also seen reports that speak of Africa's resources and a significant proportion of share of total resources. And few countries are as richly endowed as South Africa or Nigeria. Yet, how do you explain the fact that Italy, a country with no natural resources to speak of, has an economic output 6 times South Africa? Members and candidates, I think you ought to know, or you know, that the CFA Standard of Professional Conduct number 5 that deals with investment analysis, recommendation, and action imposes an obligation on candidates and members to have a reasonable and adequate basis supported by appropriate research and investigation for any analysis or recommendation. Now, the research and investigation on the reasons for Africa's underperformance and the relevant drivers for any future improvement in performance indicate that it shall not be driven by the size of our arable land, or by Africa's demographics, or by her natural resources, or by her growing capacity to consume mobile phones. I can see Eleanor with an iPad. Indeed, I'm not aware of any country on this planet that has grown its economy on those drivers. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the focus of what I wanted to share with you today. Because a lot of this information is information and reports that have been prepared outside Africa, in Washington, in London, in Asia, and we receive this information and we digest it and assimilate it as a gospel truth. And so what is our role? What is our role in telling Africa's narrative? So what is missing? What needs to bridge the gap between Africa's current state and its potential? Why is it that Africa, despite its promise and resources, is home to the majority of poor people on the planet? Why is it that Africa, which is home to 17% of the world's population, occupies 20% of the world's landmass? Why is it that it only contributes 3% to global output and less than 0.1% to annual economic growth? My diagnosis, ladies and gentlemen, is that Africa has a productivity problem. It's not about the resources. It's not about the people. It's not about the land. It is about productivity. And I really liked the cartoon today. If you saw the cartoon today that was talking about land as an emotive issue, and there was a picture of a brain, and they said this should be the emotive issue. That is what is wrong with us. It's productivity. It is leadership. And my dear students of economics and finance, at least one of the books I bought with my SACCO loan was a book on economics. And in that book, I realized that productivity is the efficiency with which resources are utilized to generate output. Productivity is what sets the standards of living, wages, returns on capital, returns on natural resources that a nation can sustain. You also had the debate around minimum wages. We didn't hear much talk of productivity. And competitiveness is defined as the set of institutions, and I want to echo the word institutions, policies and factors that determine the level of productivity of a country. And competitiveness is linked to productivity. Eleanor mentioned that one of my favorite books is Why Nations Fail. And that's a question that has always baffled me. Why is it that countries with so much potential end up underperforming so significantly? What is the issue? And when I read this book, the argument they make is that the difference in the economic success of nations is because of the difference in their institutions. The rules that influence how the economy works, institutions are the rules that influence how economy works and what motivates people. And there are two types of political institutions. There are extractive institutions and inclusive institutions. And it is a political process that determines the rules that people live under. And it is political institutions that determine how this process works. Inclusive political institutions are broad-based with a system of checks and balances that contain the exercise of power by any one individual or institution. Extractive political institutions, on the other hand, concentrate power in the hands of a narrow elite with limited institutional checks and balances. Inclusive political institutions support inclusive economic institutions that enforce property rights, create a level playing field, and encourage investments in new technologies and skills. Extractive political institutions, on the other hand, are linked to extractive economic institutions that are structured to extract resources from the many by the few, and they fail to protect property rights or provide incentives for economic activities. Nations are poor today, and we can say we are poor today, because if you take sub-Saharan Africa and exclude Egypt and South Africa, the total economic output of all the other 52 African countries is less than a middle-income country than like Turkey. And so the question is, what's the issue? The nations are poor today because the extractive economic institutions do not create incentives needed for people to save, invest, and innovate. And extractive political institutions support these economic institutions by cementing the power of those who benefit from those institutions. So, who is responsible for the development of institutions? Is it the IMF? Is it the World Bank? Is it a consultant from London? Is it a consultant from India or Asia? Who is going to help us build our institutions? Again, this is a subject that is dear to me and I've taken time to research it. Countries that have made a transition from extractive economic institutions to inclusive ones, that transition has been driven by the country's population, and particularly its middle class and its elite. Those transitions have been driven by men and women like us in those societies. Those individuals have not abdicated their responsibilities to society, but they have really focused on transforming those societies. In England, you may not know, prior to the Industrial Revolution, during the Agrarian Revolution, they went through what was called the Glorious Revolution, and that was in 1689. And that saw the overthrow of the king, and a new king came in place, but that overthrow enshrined the Bill of Rights, significantly reduced the powers of the monarchy, and transferred them to an elected parliament. It led to the abolition of monopolies, reformed finance, and it's what heralded the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Had the Glorious Revolution not happened, the Industrial Revolution that followed would not have happened. And in societies such as ours, we are not yet there because the issues we are discussing are issues of an agrarian stage of development. The Glorious Revolution was supported by the English middle class, particularly the merchants. Botswana achieved remarkable growth because of the inclusive political and economic institutions that were established at independence by Seretse Khama and Kwet Masire and the Botswana Democratic Party. The stories of Botswana, England, even China, which went through its cultural revolution in the late 70s, the United States, Japan, South Korea, and all those countries that have managed to make the transition from extractive institutions to inclusive institutions vividly illustrate that history is not destiny. The fact that where we are does not mean we'll remain where we have been. And they powerfully demonstrate that transitions have to be driven by the locals of that country, and that some generations have to sacrifice more so that subsequent generations may enjoy. In Kenya, the process of transforming our political institutions is well underway, and the enactment of the new constitution is, in my view, a high point of developing institutional checks and balances to contain executive power. Some people have argued that these checks and balances, the various constitutional bodies that have been created, have created an unnecessarily expensive system of government. Whereas it's true that the system of government that has been created is expensive, the alternative is significantly more expensive, because it suggests that an economy stops and slows down, and the opportunity cost is far, far greater. It is interesting to note that at independence, Kenya had a higher GDP than South Korea. Today, South Korea has a GDP in excess of $1 trillion. Its GDP is greater than that of Sub-Saharan Africa in its entirety, and yet it has a population only 6 million more than Kenya. And that is what I consider the opportunity cost of poor governance. So our colleagues in the legal and the media profession have, over the last 2 decades, played a key role in the transition of our political institutions to inclusive ones. And I'm not saying that because I'm a member of the legal profession. You've seen it. You've seen the contribution that those individuals have made in the transformation of this country and the creation of political institutions. If this transformation is to have any meaningful impact on our society, it is imperative that we transition our economic institutions as well. And that is squarely the responsibility of the ladies and gentlemen in this room. I can see some of you looking at me in disbelief, wondering, is it me? And in the CFA Institute, we had a chair lady who made a passionate appeal, and I want to repeat her words: if not us, who? If not now, when? And I would also like to remind you, one of my favorite poets is the Italian poet Dante, who warned that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in times of great crisis maintain their neutrality. Ladies and gentlemen, CFA charter holders and candidates, you've been successful in this life. It will be a pity if you face eternal damnation in the next life because you maintained your neutrality in the midst of the greatest crisis unfolding today, which is the poverty and the human suffering on our continent. Back to our mission. What can we as CFA charter holders and candidates do for the ultimate benefit of our society? I say we can do a lot. First, we have a critical role in strengthening our economic institutions. The World Economic Forum conducts a global competitiveness survey, and in 2012, Kenya was placed in the bottom quartile on areas such as, out of 142 countries, on areas such as protection of minority shareholder interests, efficacy of corporate boards, strength of auditing standards, and ethical behavior of firms. If we do not address these issues, who is going to address them for us? If the men and women in this room don't take up that responsibility, who is it who is going to come and take that responsibility on our behalf? Second, we must tell the African story. It is said that until lions have their historians, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. People from outside this continent have mostly told Africa's investment story. The African voices and the voices of Africa have been silent. The research reports that guide our investment decision-making, 6 out of 10 of them are not written by people who are in the continent. It is from the perspective of individuals outside the continent looking at this continent. And one of my commandments, I have several commandments I share with my colleagues in Centum. I think it's my commandment number 13 or number 14, is to do that very, very rare of human activities, which is to think. You know, thinking is not as obvious, because when you read a report written by a consulting organization that talks about the African consumer, who do you think is the intended recipient of that report? The intended recipient of that report is a company that is looking at Africa as a market for their goods. Or when you see a report that talks about Africa's natural resources, the intended recipient of that report is a client who is going to come here and extract resources to be processed outside Africa. Who is going to tell the story of Africa on the potential that exists within this continent to be able to attract capital to come and invest in the productive sectors of our economy. Today, in excess of 90% of foreign direct investment into Africa is directed towards the extractive sectors of our economy. It is in mining, it is in natural resources, and the bulk of those resources are processed outside our continent. Today, the world is facing a global glut of capital. Just this morning, I heard a story on BBC where they are saying that because of the excessive savings in China, it has meant that global interest rates have come so low, and that capital is looking for a home. Unless we, in this room, take the initiative to develop opportunities to tap into that capital, Africa will be a destination for short-term capital that will come and grow and that will not fulfill the ultimate purpose of investment, which is to improve the welfare of the human beings within the society that the investment is taking place. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the reason why our profession was born. It was born so that it could intermediate between workers who are producing goods and services, generating capital, and those who needed capital. It was for the benefit of those societies. And it's fortunate that today we have in excess of 50 charter holders. In this room, we're in excess of 200 individuals, but we have to take that initiative. We have to get out from thinking about ourselves to say, what impact are we going to have on our society? The lion does not begrudge the hunter for telling the story the way it is told. No foreign continent holds a brief for Africa, and we should not fault the legitimate self-interest of other nations. We're in a race for resources, human, market, customers for goods and services, and it is our responsibility to tell our story, to attract capital and develop financial markets that shall be an engine of economic growth and that shall support jobs and communities within our society. Third, we have a responsibility to educate. Who saw Jaindi Kisero's editorial in yesterday's Nation, where he was lamenting at the scanty coverage of economic issues in the presidential debate? What was our contribution as investment professionals in working with our brothers in the media to ensure that the issues addressed are relevant to the challenges that we face today? I am guilty as charged. What contribution did I make? Or did I sit and, in spite of my position, wait like other ordinary Kenyans to go home and watch the debate and comment on it as if I've not gone through the CFA program? I am guilty as charged. And we are guilty as charged, and unless we step up to our responsibility, no one will come from outside to do these things for us. Who shall educate Kenyans that unless we enhance our competitive environment and productivity, which is largely a function of leadership, it does not matter how much natural resources we discover. It does not matter how much land we have. It does not matter how many children we bear. Our plight is unlikely to change. Fourth, we have a responsibility to create African success stories within our continent. Success is attractive, and unless we can create value and return for the domestic pools of capital that we manage, whether you're managing pension fund money, insurance money, SACCO money, working for a bank, working for an investment club, unless we can create value, we are unlikely to attract international pools of capital to focus on investing in Africa in the long term. Creating a critical mass of local African investors will provide foreign investors with a barometer of what to do. And we need to demonstrate that Africans are investing in Africa to be able to attract significant foreign direct investment flows outside the extractive sectors of our economy. Fifth, we have a responsibility to leave our comfort zones and pursue and assume positions of leadership. And for those of us who choose to remain as followers, we have a responsibility to be good followers, who hold our leaders accountable by engaging them on the relevant issues. Ladies and gentlemen, let us not be passive followers. They say education is in the impact of that education. What is the point of celebrating 50 CFA charter holders if Kenya and East Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa is not going to be different because we have those 50 CFA charter holders? In 10 years, there might be 100 CFA charter holders. What is the impact of that on our society? Every generation has a challenge. Our challenge as investment professionals in this age is to build institutions. I just want to repeat that again. Our responsibility is to build institutions. So wherever we are, in whatever humble positions we hold, it is critical that we build institutions that shall bridge an almost 200-year development gap between Africa and the rest of the world. We have a responsibility to lift the millions who continue to wallow in poverty out of their desperate situation. To those whom much is given, much is expected. We have received much. We have offered little in return. The drums of war are beating. My dear colleagues, shall we let posterity find us wanting in courage? Shall we neglect our responsibility? Today there are 52 charter holders in East Africa. I say we have a critical mass. And there are many more candidates. There are many more friends of the profession. Skeptics may argue that we are not enough. But my response to the skeptics and the naysayers is that one man or one woman with courage makes a majority. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and may God bless you, bless Kenya, and the elections ahead of us.